Our lives are a string of insights, flashes of inspiration that can be the catalyst for new ideas. However, our pace of life these days means we tend to miss some of them completely. I'm Dave Hill, and I'm the host of the Simple Reflections podcast, a fortnightly series of interviews with people from all walks of life. Our conversations are an invitation to reflect on some of the simple insights my guests have had that have gone on to have a profound impact on their lives. So grab a cuppa and a biscuit, join us, slow down for a little while and see what shows up for you. Well, welcome to the next episode of the Simple Reflections podcast. Today I'm joined by Esmond Baring. Esmond is a transformational coach based in Bali. He's a former financier in a former life and has had a fairly interesting life over the years, but we may cover some of that later. Esmond and I have met a couple of times over Zoom. It's a little bit tricky being in Scotland and Bali to meet in the middle. And we've had some amazing conversations about some shared passions, one of which is looking at the works of Sidney Banks and what he's been up to during his lifetime, and also a desire for both of us to try and help people live a more comfortable life, whatever it is that they're up to in the world. So welcome, Esmond. I don't know if there's anything I've missed there. If you want to expand on that, please do so.
I don't think so, Dave. No, thanks for inviting me on the podcast, and it's lovely to see you again. And yeah, I just remember how, let's say, random our first encounter was via Zoom, but it felt as though I'd re-encountered a long lost friend, and I think we spoke for an hour and a half, and you were so generous and kind with resources from your journey with the principles and your understanding. And you won't know this, but your introduction for me to Dr. Bill Pettit and a lot of his podcasts and his interviews have been instrumental to me along my way and have led to pretty profound insights, and actually led to me having a conversation with Dr. Bill in December of 2022 when I was mired in pretty violent thinking. And I had an hour and 15 minutes with Dr. Bill, and we didn't even touch on the violent thinking during that call. But by the end of it, I just had the most brilliant beaming smile on my face, and the world that I'd been experiencing 90 minutes before then had really disappeared. And it was a life-changing conversation. So I thank you for that.
Well, thank you. All I did was share some stuff that I'd seen and thought might be helpful, and that's really cool. And I'm so pleased you got to chat to Bill. He's such a wonderful human being. The fact that you've been stuck in something really quite unpleasant, had a conversation with a human being that you'd never met before. Okay, you had an idea of who he was, but the capacity for humans to connect at such a deep level that allows them to move beyond whatever it is that they're stuck in, almost instantaneously, is fascinating. And the whole reason that this podcast exists is to sort of share those kind of experiences, allow people to see what the art of the possible is as a human being, but it doesn't require anything clever or magic. It's just about sharing the beauty of being a human being and how sometimes we can get caught up in that.
Yeah, and the beauty of a human being is so broad and rich in its depth. Mm-hmm. And it strikes me that we're in these meat suits and we've had this opportunity to have this life. And with that comes, the intensity of being alive. And experiencing joy and bliss and love and peace and equanimity, but also anger and hate at times and pride and selfishness and shame and guilt and terror. This is all part of the experience. And there was that one Sid quote, which was, if human beings learn just one thing, which is to not be afraid of their experience, that alone would change the world. Is such a constant reminder to me of my willingness to be with the experience, whatever it is, and not try to run away from it or shut it down, but just to allow it to be there and come through. And, you said at the top of the introduction, I guess, about, insights that have changed the course and direction of people's lives. And I remember back in 2019, I woke up one morning after having a confronting evening with my family. And the moment I woke up the morning following that, I had an insight that alcohol had been a contributing factor to all of the emotional mental struggles that I'd had in my life. And once I'd had that insight, it no longer made any sense for me to drink alcohol ever again because I realized its toxic effects on me and my mind. And that wasn't a choice. It was just seeing something new for the first time. And interestingly enough, that then took me on a journey which led to me discovering the principles,
Mhm.
having stopped drinking alcohol and meeting Jamie Smart and you and devouring as much material and content that I could about, from what Sid had spoken to, because where he was speaking from has the ability to touch any of us into a deeper understanding, I think, of ourselves
Mm.
and others in life.
Yeah, and I think what's so wonderful about the way Sid explained it is that it wasn't about him or being special or that there was anything clever in it. It was the fact that that ability resides in every single one of us. No matter how caught up someone might be, it's there. And therefore, as Bill Pettit puts it, it's like helping someone unwrap a present that they don't know they've got. And
Exactly.
you get to witness them unwrapping it and going, "Oh my goodness!"
Exactly.
But they're actually just finding something that they've had lost in a cupboard for a while. It's been there since birth.
That's right. Bill opened a book of his wife's poetry when we were on the call
Mm,
and asked me if I minded if I read some of the poems. I was like, please go ahead. And he just read a few of the poems that his wife had written. And it was such a loving moment. It was so beautiful to share that with Bill. And after the call with him, after being with him, I asked myself, what is it about Dr. Bill? What was it about that conversation? What it is about these principles? And I come back to what Sid spoke to about love and understanding. And I guess the depth of what Bill has seen in the direction of this understanding enables him to see that there's absolutely nothing wrong with the person in front of him at
mhm.
all. And to see someone and hold someone in that frequency and in that light and in that understanding and knowing supports the person to see it for themselves. It's like,
Yeah, yeah,
the soup of thought.
completely. And it's really true. Again, it's something that I saw in Bill, and at times I was quite shocked about what he was saying, but he went on to explain and elaborate on why he said what he said about the fact that these people that on the surface are very ill, and he's not saying that they're not. They have symptoms of something, but he sees the potential for that to be alleviated in a number of ways, mainly to do with a subtle misunderstanding about human beings operate. And when people break out of that cycle, whether that's by looking in a direction and understanding it, or being shocked out of it because of a certain set of physical events that go, it no longer makes sense to get stuck in the symptoms you have. Here's some real world stuff to deal with right now. You can pick that up later.
Yeah.
If you want to go back there, you can, but you need to deal with this right now. And people's capacity to do that has been, again, hugely eye-opening for me in the way that I interact with veterans that are struggling with suicidal thoughts occasionally and not being anywhere near them to be able to support them, and knowing that it's just that connection over the telephone potentially, or even just text message, that is enough to open the door to see that there's possibility. And holding someone in that space of, okay, I can see you're really worried about where you are. I'm concerned for you, but I'm not worried about you.
Exactly.
Has a real different energy to it. And sometimes that causes friction. Sometimes that causes upset. So why aren't you worried about me? We'll come to that. We'll come to that. But just be open and curious about the fact that I'm not. And let's see where that takes us. It's a really different conversation then.
Yeah. And I remember after I went through after having the insight about the alcohol, I then went through a recovery program to sort of deal with the effects of the alcoholism of my upbringing, meaning to say, it's sort of a journey of emotional sobriety. So it was almost like there was intoxication in my body of feeling certain emotions. It was so conditioned to feel that way that I had to go through a process to. I can't remember where I was going with that now, Dave.
That's okay.
It's gone. Obviously, it wasn't important.
It might reappear.
Oh, and it was about, also learning to hold oneself tenderly in those experiences too. It's like I found that when I get stuck in certain patterns, what I can't see is how hard I'm being on myself and my own thoughts, because it was such a rigorous and default pattern for myself, sort of looking out into the world and judging and comparison of who and how and what I should be and how I should behave. I really didn't understand who I was beneath all of those conditioned patterns and ideas. And I think, the principles, the recovery program, and just coming more deeply into the body and realizing it's a safe place to be, even though the emotions can be really quite overwhelming at times, has brought me down to earth in a way that I never would have conceived possible beforehand.
So there's an interesting bit in there in terms of how harsh we are with ourselves. Because if a friend or a relative or a child was to turn up with the turmoil that we might be experiencing at times, we would probably, not 100%, but probably look at that with compassion and love and guidance to try and assist that individual with the struggles that they have. Whereas personally, we'll just get the stick out and start beating ourselves, going, I can't believe you think like that. You should know better. Boom, 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 boom. And on it goes. And it just amplifies the upset, but for want of a better way of looking at it, which is completely unnecessary, happening completely innocently. It's something that human beings tend to do to themselves, unfortunately, but it doesn't have to be that way. And the exciting thing in all of that, from what I've been learning over the last 7 years of delving into the three principles, has been the fact that even that beating ourselves up bit has value. And that sounds a bit bizarre, but it's trying to get our attention to say, remember, this doesn't help. This isn't going to help you in the long run. And it's trying to get our attention to say, maybe there's another way. At which point we catch on, at which point it drops away, which is probably what happened when you chatted to Bill. You had that discomfort beforehand. You had an experience that felt very different. I went, oh, well, that just doesn't make sense anymore. And off we go, which is, at the end of the day, in my mind, all insight is. Seeing something fresh around something that we've been stuck in for a while, to the point that it doesn't make sense anymore. And when things don't tend to make sense anymore, a little bit like you're drinking, you go, well, that doesn't make I'm going to go in this direction now.
Yeah. Well, it seemed to make more sense to feel the emotions rather than to numb them and mask them. That was, I suppose, wisdom speaking in the moment, that there is another way.
Yeah.
But then again, also lovingly knowing that at the time when drinking makes sense, it makes sense. So, and to understand that, I guess we're all operating from that place within ourselves of our greatest understanding in that moment. We can also then be gentle with ourselves, recognizing that at some level it makes sense to numb yourself with alcohol, because the emotions are so overwhelming and you're not yet in a position to be with them or process them or be around people who can lovingly support you through them. Well, maybe it does make sense to drink that alcohol or smoke that cigarette or take those drugs or work the extra 10 hours a day or whatever it may be. It's wisdom in action, isn't it?
Yeah. It's the system doing the best it can with the information that it's got.
Right.
And when it sees something different and some of that information goes, well, that bit doesn't make any sense anymore, we'll stop doing that. Brilliant.
Yeah. And you know what? I've come to see, I love that it's called the Simple Reflections podcast, isn't it?
Correct.
Okay, I've really deeply come to understand the value of simplicity in my life, like never before, and it's taken me on the most extraordinary journey to unravel all of the conditioning that tells me that life has to be more complicated than it is.
Mm.
What I mean by that is how I spend my days, what work I choose to do, whether I choose to stress myself. What is the point of me taking on more projects, more responsibilities, or the desire to achieve this, that, and the other? Why? So I'm really breaking it down into the simplicity of what I truly love, and also how much more harmony there is in my body when my life is simple and uncomplicated. I
Mm.
love speaking with people. I love to drink coffee. I love to exercise. I love to sleep. I love to walk in nature. So these are all things that I love that I can do very, very simply that cost very little money. Oh,
Hmm.
wow, that's a simple thing to realize. It's taken me 45 years to get to that place of what I truly love doing that aren't uh, an incessant pursuit of pleasure or excitation or adventure and all of this. It's actually no. There's a great and deep adventure in the simplicity of slowing down, and of
Hmm.
course, there's a remarkable opportunity to see things that you haven't seen before when you are relaxed
Yeah.
and slowing down. And that's been profound for me to see how fast I was running,
Hmm.
figuratively, literally, metaphorically, and just to really slow down. I'm really enjoying myself and who I am a whole lot more from that place. Now, I had to travel 12,000 kilometers across the world to the island of Bali in Indonesia to create the conditions for that exploration. But the more that I look at it and I look back into the world that I came from, I realize it's also possible once we're outside of the ideas of how we should fit into life and
Hmm.
who we should become and all of that.
Yeah. No, that's cool. Uh, there's a, there are certain parts of the training I've had over the years that just sit partly by design by the system that trained me. Um, but in the forefront of my mind, what am I, 26 years after I started my military training, um, the Army loves an acronym. Um, and one of the first ones they taught us at Santos was KISS, keep it simple, stupid. Um, because if you overcomplicate things, people will get confused, they'll forget, things
Right,
will unravel. And when you're living and working in a really complicated world, the more simple you can make your plans
right,
and the actions you've got coming up, the better the chance you have of success. And it's just sat with me, and well, yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense, and it's been there my whole life. Yeah, probably has been there my whole life. But that was a sort of cementing moment of yeah, no, that this is why it makes sense. Um, and when things feel complicated, it's probably because I'm not seeing something quite straight yet. That's fine.
right,
Let's explore
right,
that. But the more
right,
stressed I feel about it, the faster
right.
my mind will be running, the less likely I'm going to see the simplicity. So let's take a step back. Um,
And when you take a step, I'm just curious, when you take a step back, do you have a modus operandi for slowing down when you're going around and around in circles? Would you take a walk? Would it be in the shower? How do you
that's
pause
a
and
that's a
regather
great
yourself?
question. I think it completely depends on the moment. I think the first bit is noticing, being aware that I'm running too hot. Okay, that's interesting. That's probably normally enough. It tends to involve a cup of tea.
Yeah, I love that.
Uh, it tends to. There's something quite comforting about a cup of tea. Uh, but it could be just changing. Right, actually, I've spent too long focused on this. Let's just do something else,
Mm,
whatever that might be. And it might be that I switch to a completely different task it's
yeah,
completely unrelated, but still needs like the housework, something that still needs to get done. Go and
yeah,
do that.
yeah,
Or realize that okay, I'm a bit stuck here. I'm not getting to the conclusion that I'm looking for in terms of the piece of work that I'm doing. Um, uh, and just let's park that. Go and do
yeah,
something else, knowing that when my mind slows down,
Yeah.
things tend to go, oh yeah, there you go. There's the solution to something you were thinking about 4 days ago. Awesome.
Yeah.
No computer, no active computation going on, just the mind doing its thing.
It's so interesting. Yeah. I've been looking in the direction of a teaching called the Gene Keys recently, and there's a concept of pausing. So when you look at nature and you notice a bird or a dog or an insect or an animal, they have natural pauses in their
Mm-hmm.
life. So they're busying about collecting their nuts or their food or whatever, and they naturally stop. And just for a moment, they look around. They're taking their environment, and then they carry on going on with what they're doing. And so I brought this practice of pausing into my life. So if I'm at a traffic light and I might be cursing because in my mind I'm in a rush to get to my very important destination, which has no meaning to anyone or anything, and I just slow down and I take that as an opportunity to breathe more deeply and just to look up and around and see landmarks on the road or birds in the sky. I'm just giving my whole system an opportunity just to settle down again,
Mm-hmm.
and for me to realize how much of a train of thought that I can get myself into from the very beginning of the day unless I'm careful. So
Mm-hmm.
if I'm careful about that, I can actually influence the motion of my mind during the day. And so I set my alarm every 3 hours, and for 3 minutes every 3 hours, I pause and I deepen my breathing, and I contemplate actually life in that moment rather than thinking about life. And there's
Mm-hmm.
a sort of difference in that, isn't there? It's like how much of my life am I actually living, and how much of my life am I spent thinking about my living? I love that when I heard that.
It's very true. I think it's interesting that you bring that up because I think that natural moment of reflection and pausing on nothing other than just, oh yeah, here we are, happens to us naturally. It's great that you've sort of set a routine around that to so you're becoming more conscious of it. But I bet you the squirrel doesn't think, oh right, time to pause. It's just, oh, here I am. What was I doing? Oh yeah, and off it goes again. And I think we all can do that for ourselves day to day without really realizing that that's what's going on. And thank you so much for bringing it to our attention because it's true. There is a moment of recalibration of, oh yeah, this is the world that I'm in rather than the one that I'm creating in my mind. Um, so thank you for sharing that. That's really cool.
It's been really helpful for me, and I think what you said is exactly right. It is a natural thing, but I question how natural are the lives that we're living that I
Oh
have
yeah,
to
yeah,
that I
yeah,
have
yeah.
that I have to condition myself to remember to be natural, or uncondition myself,
Mhm.
or unravel or decondition the fact that I don't do that as often as I naturally might.
Yes, yeah, yeah. No, that's cool. That is cool.
And there's another thing. I was speaking to Jamie Smart, who was my mentor for a year. He's a principles man, as you know. And I loved the conversations he and I had together, and it was so supportive. And at one point, I was like, Jamie, I want to see what Sid saw. I want to have the insight of all insights because I'm having profound changes in my understanding of myself and the direction of my life and how I feel about myself, and um, etc. etc. But I want to be done with it forever. And and um, and I've then found myself becoming frustrated. So I was like, okay, I've had a profound change in my life from coming across these three principles. And yet I find that there are some repetitive shadow patterns that seem to continually play out in my life. And what I would love, even though the principles espouse the whole thing, it's all thought. What can I do to potentially identify some of these shadow patterns so as not to try and avoid them or run away from them or distract myself from them, but learn to be with them and integrate them? And this is what led me to this synthesis called the Gene Keys, Dave, which is a way of understanding what those shadow patterns are in a repressive and a reactive way. And I found that because the premise of the Gene Keys teaching, there's a gift that lies in every single shadow. So the shadows are there to teach us something, rather like you
Mm.
said. It's like there's real richness and fertility in the shadow if we're willing to just have a little look at it, not to indulge ourselves in it or become self-obsessed and self-absorbed by the shadows, but just to allow them to be there. It's really, really helped me a lot.
That's cool. Yeah, well, yeah, it's so true. There is something for us to learn in everything, and that the idea that we can ever be the finished article, we're on a hiding to nothing in the pursuit of that, because we're never not going to be learning. We're always going to be learning something new, and that's exciting. Even if that is going into the shadows and looking somewhere that looks dark and gloomy, there's probably there will be stuff there that we've not seen, and that itself just opens possibilities, opens doors that were unseen before, that could shed a whole load of light on a whole load of things, and catapult us into another level of understanding that just feels amazing, to the point that we then think, okay, this is it, and it won't be, because there'll be more shadows. There'll be more shadows.
Exactly right. Exactly. And I love what you said about, like, it is exciting. When I was growing up, let's say in my early 20s, and I looked up to middle-aged folk, around the age that I am now, and you probably are now, 45 or 50. And, the perception that I had from that naive place was that life was sort of beginning to move towards its twilight, in the sense that, and how wrong could I have been? And so I do see it as an exciting adventure. I really do. And I have this sort of enthusiasm and excitement about how much more life has to offer, and how much more I can understand, and how more deeply I can feel, and what levels of understanding might I be blessed to reach in this lifetime. And that's pretty epic. I see that as seriously epic.
Yeah. No, it's one of those gifts that we unwrap as we get older. I think
that's right.
It's not surprising as a sort of teenager and 20 odd year old that you look at people in their 40s and go, geez, that's scary grown up. I remember when I turned 30, it was around about 30. No, it must have been 33, 34. My youngest looked at me and goes, oh, Daddy, you must be ancient. You must be 9. But right. She was at 3. That was 3 times her age. She didn't know how to do that maths at that stage. But 9 was big. 9 was big, and that was her view of ancients at that time. And it's funny how we sort of benchmark life.
Yes, exactly.
Based on our experience on the planet to date. So as a 20-year-old, someone in their 30 or 40s, like, oh my goodness, that's to come. It looks a long, long way away, when actually it's not very far, and there's still a long way to go, thankfully, which is great.
Where do you think that benchmarking comes from? Because I certainly had a frame of reference in my mind that contained many different benchmarks. I suppose it's a product of education, it's a product of family, it's a product of society. But they're just ideas. They're just thoughts. So we've each got these all benchmarks in our minds, and they're all different. Some of them be quite similar based on our formative years, but it's all made up.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the whole thing. It's all made up.
Yeah. And benchmarks are too.
Exactly.
Given your old world of the financial industry, benchmarks are a guide, but they're made up based on the set of criteria that you create to make them in the first place. We're not going to look at that stuff. We're just going to look at this stuff, and we're going to measure ourselves against this stuff. Good. Okay.
Exactly.
You've made that up, but you then use it to hold yourself to account, because we're not hitting the benchmark, or we're not exceeding the benchmark, forgetting that you made the thing up in the first place.
Exactly.
So it's a funny old game, this being a human being. And it comes back to that business between complexity and simplicity. When we see ourselves as human beings, and our ability to connect, no matter what our age or our experience, you just have to look at at a toddler and someone in their 80s or 90s, and their ability to connect and have beautiful conversations, slightly nutty conversations, probably given the various subject matters, but still a human connection, which just proves that those barriers that we build in societally about age and those differences in generations is just that, because the ability to connect as a human being is innate. It's there. We can think ourselves out of it.
Exactly.
We can, and going back to the, normally for good reason, because we don't see, we've created a story about ourselves that, oh, I don't do that because, and therefore I think like this, and that protects me from whatever. We haven't created that whole story in the depth of that. We've just gone, oh no, that's just not me, which shuts us off from a whole load of things that are in the shadows, that we're trying to keep ourselves safe from, which is amazingly logical and sensible until you realize that there's a subtle misunderstanding there. It says there's nothing scary over there. It's just something that you have a little bit of thinking about that is taking you away from the richness of being a human being.
Yeah, I love that. And as you were speaking, I heard in the word connection is that, in those moments of connection, the idea of who we are no longer ceases to exist because we're so deeply in the moment with another. And it's beautiful.
Yeah.
So my thinking about myself is no longer.
Yeah. Because again, like a benchmark, my version of Dave is something I've made up. It's based on,
and so is my version of Dave. It's
absolutely
made up.
Absolutely. But it serves both of us. Neither are completely true. There are, a number of facts that we've picked up over time that we're using to help create the version of me in this instance. That's great, because it serves a purpose to allow us to continue a conversation. But it can change in any moment. My version of me has incrementally changed over the 47 years of my life. I will tell myself a story to say that it's a, there's a linear process to how I've got here today, and that's my version of history. But it's just my version I'm making up, and I'm picking and choosing the elements that I'm either proud of or not proud of, that I'm using to hold myself to account for how I operate today.
Interesting. I'd say there's a feeling I have around Dave. So when you open the Zoom room, I smiled because I saw Dave and I felt Dave again. It was like it was good to feel you again, rather than to experience my idea of you. It was just there he is. It's a good feeling, and I suppose in a way that's that feeling of connection again, isn't it? Yeah. It's just so warm and inviting and enveloping and inclusive and just lovely.
Well, thank you. And that's the capacity that we all have for each other, is to just be as simply us as we possibly can, put our thoughts about who we are to the side, and just be with someone, enjoy that moment, and see where it takes us, see what we can learn. Whether that's in a commercial relationship where, it's either of us as the, as the coach or the client, it doesn't matter. There's going to be a learning in there for both parties.
Exactly.
That's the exciting bit, because we will both see something cool on this journey, and let's be there together. It is like going on an adventure. Like, okay, where would you like to go? I'm fairly comfortable with a map and a compass, but I've not been here before. Where would you like to go? You're less comfortable with a map and a compass. Let's see where we end up. And together we will have an amazing adventure. That's the beauty of coaching, as I see it, is it opens up the possibility for people to step into their shadows in a more comfortable way, knowing that there's someone there that's got a torch.
100%. And in the old therapeutic model, I think the psychologists and psychiatrists, there was a a clear delineation, differentiation between the doctor and the patient. So the doctor had to carry themselves in a certain posture,
Mhm.
and there wouldn't be any necessarily sharing of stories for resonance or empathy or compassion. But I've discovered in the coaching conversation, there is the ability to be a human with another human
Mhm.
and to share stories of life experience, which creates the context for it's fully permissible to be who we both are in this moment with the experiences we've had, and also to be okay not knowing too. It's just I've always it's boggled my mind a little bit since I got some support with, let's say, the emotional struggles that I experienced earlier in my life, just how much honesty I found with the people, quote unquote, who are the most fucked up or going through the greatest difficulties or addicts or whatever. There was a level of honesty in those rooms that I'd never experienced in the outside world. And it got me to thinking just about how much of a front I had put on or an image I was portraying throughout my life. And since these experiences, the greatest experiences I have with another human being now are at depth and are at
Mhm.
the level of reality without the need to pretend one way or t'other. And that's what I love about it. And as we've touched on before, there is so much power in that when two people are willing to fully be with one another. And it is healing. It is
Yeah.
healing.
Yeah. Completely. It come linking what you've just said there to that benchmarking conversation. It comes back to professionalism and what people's perception of professionalism is. Oh, right. No, there needs to be distance in this relationship because
Right,
I'm the
right,
professional, you're the client.
right,
We need to keep distance. It needs to remain professional. There's got to be boundaries for us to operate in.
right.
At which point, the human being gets removed from the equation and you lose that connection
Yeah,
potentially.
yeah.
Interestingly, doctors with a good bedside manner are being human. Probably they're embracing their ability to be vulnerable with their patients. Lawyers that can strike up a good rapport with their clients are probably
Mm,
being more human than
exactly,
professional in the way that the
exactly.
system might see them. Um, and that idea around professionalism is made up. Um,
Exactly, exactly.
I'm doing some training at the moment, and I was having a conversation with one of the other members of the course. We do sort of peer coaching type stuff, and we were both, we've both enjoyed having fun during those conversations and seeing where that takes us. And that's where I come from. I'm looking for fun in everything that we do, whoever it is that I'm dealing with, no matter what the subject matter is, because
Mm,
I know that if you can hit the funny bone, for want of a better term, and get a laugh, that you've started to rebuild connection for the individual that you're speaking to with their own humanity. And that doesn't mean to say that you're not taking their world seriously. You can absolutely take their world seriously and have fun at the same time. And I think there's real gold in that approach to, well, yeah, I can see how rubbish that is, but let's try and have some fun in and around our exploration of that to help us climb out of wherever we are.
yeah, exactly. And invariably, it's the seriousness that causes consciousness to stick.
Mhm.
So if you can be the salve or the ointment that creates a little chink in the armor that allows the light to fire through, and it is light because it's lightness, and we find the levity in
Mhm.
these really serious situations. And I remember you sharing a story the last time we spoke, in fact, when we did the podcast together, about a man that you were speaking to who was going through some suicidal thoughts, and you made light of some of the things that he was doing, and it brought humor to the situation, so he could see it from a different perspective. So it's just again, it's like a circuit breaker, isn't it? It's a
Mhm.
circuit breaker for something new to come through, to see something in a different way, and it just shatters that frame that's
Yep.
being made up anyway. So
Yep.
yes, 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 and I at what point did we decide that life had to be serious? This is another thing too. There's an idea of like growing out of childhood and becoming a grown-up, right? And
Yeah.
all the grown-ups are so bloody serious. Rare is the naughty uncle or the doctor with the bedside manner who isn't serious, but who's just loving and understanding and cares and listens. It's like, well, okay, maybe there is a time for seriousness, but perhaps not as much as we're all placing so much value on this
Yeah.
idea of seriousness.
Yeah.
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 I find myself sort of going backwards. I wasn't very good at playing the serious role. I tried it so hard to be serious, and it didn't work out for me. And I have so much more results in my life that are so much more enjoyable to me when I take it less seriously. Is what I would love to. Yeah. So I'd say that.
Hold it more lightly.
Hold it more lightly.
Seriousness has a sort of, we've got to hang on to this because otherwise it's going to fall apart.
Well, that's it. And just on that, when Dr. Bill talked about love letters, that metaphor of when you're like driving in your really fast car on the Autobahn and everything's in great nick and you're cruising and the car feels safe and you're on top of the world and you suddenly feel a bit tired, right? And the car veers towards the central barrier and you have those bumper strips, and those bumper strips are there to wake us up and jolt us out and put us back onto the highway, into the smooth groove again. And just to see, like you said before, it's like, oh, what is the body telling me right now? I'm feeling overworked, stressed. I'm feeling negative. I'm feeling worried or frightened. Oh, that's a love letter. That's a love letter from life, just to remind me that I've forgotten for a moment that I'm in thought.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So beautiful. And it's loving. It's loving. It's just gentle.
It's all information to help us through life. Amazing.
It's
absolutely
brilliant.
Amazing. Yeah, absolutely amazing. And ever so simple. But we get ourselves wrapped up in trying to make it complicated again. Well, Esmond, that's been wonderful. Probably a nice place to wrap up. But before we do, is there anything that you're up to in the world at the moment that you'd like to share with the listeners, that and how to get hold of you, all that kind of stuff?
No is the answer.
Perfect. That makes sense given where you were at the start. I'm trying to simplify things and just chill. Thank you very much. So no's a perfectly good answer.
Yes, thank you.
No, that's cool. Well, thank you so much indeed for joining us. It's been wonderful to see you again.
Dave, man, thanks for having me. I really appreciate you and I appreciate being here.
No, thank you very much indeed for coming. Thank you for joining us today. If you've enjoyed the conversation, feel free to subscribe and join me and my new guest next time. If you're interested in the work I'm doing, or you think I can be of service to you or your organisation, please email dave@simplicityofmind.co.uk. Remember, see if you can find time to slow down and reflect. Those simple ideas might be worth listening to. Take care, and I hope you can join me in a couple of weeks.